Hello, everybody. My name is Yuhyan. I'm your host today. I'm one of the data reporters at the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm going to introduce you to all of our team members shortly. First, I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. Our aim at the Chronicle is to produce these live-streamed events to provide our readers another platform to connect with the many talented voices you read every day on sfchronicle.com. That was kind of weird to say coming out of my own mouth, but I was given this copy. You can always find these events and subscriber exclusive perks on sfchronicle.com/membership. All right, so should we get on with introducing our team members? All right, we are going to start with our captain of the ship. Dan, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dan Koff. I'm the data editor here at the Chronicle. I'm so happy to be here and get a chance to talk with all of you. My background before I became a journalist was as a statistician, data scientist, as I did that for about a decade before getting into media.
And next up, we have Susie Nielsen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susie. I'm kind of Yuhyan's other half as one of the two data reporters on the team. And I cover primarily crime and criminal justice issues, housing, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic.
Next up, we have Nami.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nami. I am the data visualization developer on the team. So I make a lot of interactive visualizations using JavaScript and D3. But I also do a lot of analysis and some reporting and writing, mainly on transportation and politics.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to quickly introduce myself before we talk about the team's goals. Again, my name is Yuhyan. That's a Korean name, by the way. My specialties are more, I guess, environment related. So I do a lot of reporting on fires, the climate, and things like that. But also, I've reported a little bit on the overdose epidemic, specifically related to fentanyl. So those are some of the things that we do. And we wanted to, before we get into the census talks, we wanted to talk a little bit about our team and our goals so that you can get to know us a little bit. So Dan, I wanted to ask you, as the captain of our ship, could you tell us a little bit about the overarching goal of this team?
Yeah, definitely. And actually today is our 6-month anniversary as a team. Nami and I started about 6 months ago, and the rest of the team a little before and after that. So yeah, I actually wrote something down that I wanted to share. It's such an exciting opportunity to get to talk about what we do. So the way we think about what we do is that data is an incredible source for understanding our world. Right? While some journalists interview people for sources, or others trawl through government documents as their main source, our primary source is data produced by government agencies or data we collect on the web. We also believe that charts, tables, and maps are often a better way to express what data tells us than words. We use words too, but we also like to use visualizations. Data journalism is a relatively new field in journalism, largely because it was much harder to do before computers. Organizations produced much less data, and there wasn't the computing power to do much analysis or visualization. Today, on the other hand, there's an endless stream of data that can help us understand the Bay Area. For example, a number of Bay Area counties produce data on every 911 call, why the call was made and when it was made. BART and other transportation agencies produce minute-by-minute numbers on how many trips are made on BART and how many people crossed each bridge in the region. We even found a data set the other day of every permit for films that have been made and each address where films have been shot. There's data on every fire, on thousands of air quality monitors, on what exactly the government is doing to control fires. So we think that by analyzing this data, we hope we can inform and entertain the public and call to account those in power, which is exactly what journalists have always done, but we're just using data primarily. And yeah, that's how we think about what we do.
Thanks, Dan. We should also hear from the reporters about their goals. Susie, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I think every coverage area I have different goals for, but one thing that I'm particularly proud of that we've done at the Chronicle so far is our crime data coverage. I think within the broader world of media, there are a lot of ongoing conversations about how news and TV coverage sensationalizes crime and dehumanizes people who commit crimes or who are victims of crimes. And I personally believe that data, because it looks at trends rather than individual stories, can do a much better job of looking at the bigger picture of crime and helping our audiences understand what they need to care about, what they need to worry about. For instance, I think a recent study showed that the majority of Americans think that crime is at an all-time high, but actually it's nearing all-time lows in this country, violent crime at least. So using numbers and charts and continually bringing that home for our readers is something that we've done a lot of in the last couple of months and something I'm proud of.
Thanks, Susie. Nami, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll just add a few things about like data visualizations. I think as a team, we aim to create charts that are easy to understand, well designed, have a like clean aesthetic. And I'm especially excited about visualizations that make really large data sets more accessible to people. And so the data team, along with the developer team, we build a lot of interactive tools that help sort of personalize the data and let you like filter it down and make it most relevant to you.
Thanks, Nami. So my teammates have said such great things that I don't have much to add, but the only thing I will say is that ultimately, all of this adds up to us trying to provide a public service and to enact justice by doing so. All right, with that being said, we were going to directly move on to the census talk, but yesterday was the recall election, so we would be irresponsible to not talk about it. So why don't we just like quickly go over our data work from last night. Dan and Nami, you guys were involved in the coverage, right?
That's right. Yes. We were up all night looking at numbers, trying to figure out what's going on. So what we know so far is that Governor Newsom was not recalled. And, you know, last night was it's probably besides the decennial census, the biggest numbers night of the year. You know, we get a lot of data from every precinct in the state about who voted for who. In the end, it's, as it stands, about 71% of the state is reported, and 64% has gone to no, to not call Newsom, and 36% has gone to yes. I think one of the most interesting things that we noted is that San Francisco County was the only county where Larry Elder would not have been the person, as far as the data shows us so far, that would have won the recall had Newsom been recalled. Actually, Kevin Paffrath, who is a Democrat, it looks like he may win San Francisco County on the second part of the vote. And that would make San Francisco, as it often is, an extremely liberal anomaly in our state. Nami, did you have any thoughts from working the election last night?
No, not really. I mean, the race was called pretty early, so it didn't end up being a long night for us. But yeah, we'll be coming out with more stories in the next, I don't know, days, weeks. So yeah, look out for those.
All right, we will definitely keep a lookout. So now we'll move on to the census talk portion, which is what y'all signed up for. And as we do that, we did have a glossary prepared that for the link for which we will be circulating. If you look at the screen over here, our master of the stream has posted the short link, bit.ly/data-glossary. If you go over there, this is a list that Dan has prepared for us, explaining some of the commonly used census glossary. So if you look at that throughout our presentation, we'll go over some of them, but it might be helpful for you to have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over here. All right. Can everybody see? Looks like we can. So here's our presentation. We're going to start by going over what the decennial census is in the first place. So Dan, why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to talk about this. It's really probably maybe sadly, my favorite subject in the world is talking about census-produced data. And the decennial census is the big one in a lot of ways. Well, what is it exactly? It's in the Constitution that the government every 10 years has to enumerate a count of every person living in the United States. They've been doing it since 1790. Every person is counted, including people who are not citizens as well, who are residents here. And it was originally the main way that the government made sure that people were represented equally across states and regions, things like that. And as it went along, the question list got longer. Besides just asking what's your name, where do you live, etc. They started asking a lot more questions, but we'll get into that in a second. So how is it different from the American Community Survey or other Census Bureau products? So when you hear about data from the census, you actually are probably often hearing about data from the American Community Survey, not from the decennial census. So numbers you might see on how many people do different jobs, what people's incomes are, where people are moving from one place to another. That all comes from the American Community Survey, which is done every single year, and where they interview about 1% of the population distributed equally across the United States. And it's a really, really powerful survey. I mean, I think it has over 500 questions. It's really tons of information in it. The decennial census, on the other hand, really only had a few questions. You get things on race and ethnicity, and you get age. And really what's only reported at this point is over 18 and under 18. So it can tell us a lot about population and about race and demographics, but not much about anything else. The other thing that's of course special about it is that everyone is counted. It's not a 1% sample. So if we want to know like how the population of San Francisco has changed, or a neighborhood, community, or whatever, this is the best data. This is where you go to be able to say, okay, what's changed about my block, right? You couldn't do that with the American Community Survey or any other product. If you wanted to know, have more young people moved onto my block? Has it become more white? Has it become more Asian, et cetera? So what was the response rate for this? The census is trying to survey every single person in the country. Did they? The answer is no, but the census itself says, yes, we have a 99.98% response. In reality, we know that a lot of people are undercounted. So the groups that the Urban Institute think tank finds are undercounted are Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and children under 5. And I think it's largely for the first couple of groups because of distrust of the government or being less likely to be homeowners. And it's much easier to find people and much easier to serve them or identify that they are, in our communities at all when they're homeowners. So it is not a perfect representation of who is in this country, but it is maybe the best one that we have in a way. So why does it matter? Why are we here talking to you about it? What's important about this? Well, it's important for a huge number of reasons. One, it's what's used to redistrict political boundaries. So at every decade, you're probably hearing about this. States all across the country are changing their congressional districts, even within their states, their state senate districts, or excuse me, not state senate, but state representative districts. School boundaries are often based on this. The supervisor districts in San Francisco, if you live in San Francisco, are going to be redrawn based on this and where the number of people in San Francisco has grown. There's also money that flows out of the federal government. About $1.5 trillion every year flows out from the federal government out to communities based on the number of people they have. So if people are counted in one place more than another, that has real consequences. And when certain places are growing, they end up getting more resources. And when they're getting smaller, they get less. And then finally, from my perspective, as just like a data junkie, it's just interesting and like fun. It's like, I thought these things were happening in my community, and I thought the population was changing in this way, but now we really get to know. It's like, this is data. This is at least flawed data, but probably the best data we have to really make like assessments about our country. And the last question we have here: did we get all the data we were supposed to? There was a lot of concern with COVID-19 that the collection wouldn't be able to happen. And though the data was postponed and it didn't come out until a couple months later than was expected, the census claims that they were able to do it basically as they had meant to. And again, it's possible, we don't know this for sure yet. It's possible that there were even larger undercounts because of COVID-19 of certain communities, but we don't know that yet. And that's research that will be coming out over the next few years, months, et cetera. And yeah, that's my thoughts about the census. So I think Susie's going to talk about what's in the release and what's not.
Actually, it's Nami.
Well, there you go. Thanks, Nami.
Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, the decennial census doesn't have all of the variables that we might normally be used to seeing from the American Community Survey. But so what is in the actual release? It has total population, and it has that broken down into several geographic levels. So that includes census blocks, tracts, cities, counties, and states. And Susie will go through like what some of those exactly mean. I think you can also find that in the glossary. It also tells us the number of people under and over 18, again, in those different geographic levels. Also gives us the number of people in each race and ethnicity. And then lastly, the number of housing units, again, in each geography, and how many of those are vacant. And that's sort of it. What's not included is data on income, employment, and those other sort of like variables you might be used to from the ACS data. Detailed ancestry data is also not included. So race and ethnicity data is sort of only broken down by these broad categories, and Susie will go through what those are. And information on where people move to and from, also citizenship, is not included. Susie.
All right. Yeah, so I could talk a little bit about some basic terms that the census uses. And first off, I would just like to note that we probably would not, if we were designing the census and we were naming these things, we would not probably do it the exact same way. But this is how the census defines certain groups and concepts. So first is a household. So for example, you might think that maybe your nuclear family is your household. So that would, for me, be my parents and my siblings. But since I live alone, I'm technically my own household along with my cat, but she's not counted in the census. So my parents would be their own separate household. And then block data refers to, so a census block is basically the size of a city block. So in a city, it is an actual city block, and in a more rural area, it's bounded generally by something else, but it's the smallest unit of geography for which the census collects data. And then the tract level, as Dan says, I think in the glossary, it's something that data journalists love because it is small enough that it can provide a lot of really granular detail about an area, like a neighborhood, but it's also big enough that there's not a lot of margin of error, whereas at the block level, there can be a fair amount of error. And then, yeah, so race is, the census basically says that it recognizes racial categories based on like the socioeconomic climate of the United States at that time. And the racial groups currently reported by the census are American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. And then ethnicity is actually a separate category, which is used to determine whether somebody is Hispanic and Latino or not. And it's separate from the race question. So you can identify as Hispanic and also white, Hispanic and also Asian, Hispanic and also Black. And actually, I believe the Census Bureau petitioned the Trump administration to flatten it into one question, but they did not do that this year. And then the final term that we wanted to go over is plurality, which confused me for a while, actually, before I became a data person. A plurality is the biggest group out of 100%. So say like there was a three-way race. I actually learned it when I was watching the primaries last year. So like Bernie Sanders got a plurality of the Democratic primary in some state. So he got 45%. That's not a majority. It's not over 50%, but it's the biggest percentage of any candidate in the group. So yeah, those are some terms.
A really useful term in the Bay Area, given how diverse the region is. So when we're talking about race and ethnicity, like it's always something that we're going to have to use for a lot of the county.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really learned how to describe plurality when I was doing these census stories on Asian plurality. So I'm very glad for that. So now that we got some of these basics out of the way, it's time to dive into some of the stories and analyses that our team performed, of course, in cooperation with the rest of the newsroom. So let's talk about some of the biggest takeaways from this release. Let's start with some of the stories that Nami did.
Yeah. So I worked on several stories about just population growth. And this was like the first story that I think the Chronicle published on the census. So we looked at the Bay Area population growth, and we found that it outpaced the growth of the state and also the country. So within the 9-county Bay Area, population grew by 8.6% in the last decade. And so in this map here, we have the 9 counties, and you can see that every county had an increase, but the most growth sort of happened like in the East Bay and like in Alameda, Contra Costa, Solano. And there was also pretty big increases in like the South Bay area.
Curious to hear from the audience also about if they're feeling on the ground these changes that are reflected in the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really like notable also like the Napa and Sonoma Marin, really much slower growing regions. I know, we've talked about Marin as one of the, wealthier areas, and it's really been slow to build housing over the last decade. And I think that that's really reflected in this data.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Yuhyan, do you want to go to the next slide? Nice. Yeah, and then I worked on another story looking specifically at the population growth in San Francisco. And so in the whole city population grew by 8.5%. So that's very close to the 8.6% growth in the Bay Area. But that growth in the city was really concentrated in certain areas. So what I did was I divided the city geographically in 5 different ways. And 3 of them are on this slide here. Some of the ways that we divided it are kind of unconventional. I think the first one that's on here is, so that's divided in quadrants. So I first split the city north and south based on Golden Gate Park, and then sort of tried to divide it down the middle. So that's what you get when you do that. And I found that the largest percent growth was in the northeast quadrants. That's in yellow in this screenshot. And that's everything northeast of Hayes Valley. So that growth was 15%. And then the smallest growth happened in the southwest. So in the like pinkish orange. And that includes like the Sunset District, Twin Peaks, and sort of everything southwest. And that area only grew by 2%. And then in the second screenshot, I looked at coastal versus inland census tracts. So taking basically the census tracts that are around the coast and comparing that growth to everything else. It turns out there's a big difference. So the coastal areas grew by 33%, but inland areas only grew by 7%.
Yeah. I think it's not, I believe that a lot of that has to do with Mission Bay, right?
Yes.
This is like a huge portion of like what's changed. And I guess that's in the next chart, but right.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Nami.
No, that's exactly what we saw when we looked at just like specific census tracts. So that's what the third map is showing. And the dark blue areas are the areas that grew the most. And so you can see that it's like really along the bay, those coastal census tracts are sort of pushing up the total coastal census tract population growth. But it's like, especially in like South Beach, Mission Bay, Dogpatch, that sort of area.
Yeah, I mean, I can see also like the Sunset Parkside area in Richmond has really been slow to grow. And I know that that's been another big housing issue in the news about like zoning those areas. I don't know, Susie, you've probably been tracking some of that.
I just want to remind folks that these charts are available for viewing at sfchronicle.com/data. All those stories are up there right now. The reason we can't share all of the links is because the YouTube is funky with full links. So if you wouldn't mind navigating to sfchronicle.com/data, you can find these stories and view the charts in full size on your browser. So I want to remind you to do that. And also, I do see some questions rolling in the comments. Please keep them coming. We're going to have a Q&A session coming up after our talk, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. That being said, I'm going to move on, take the baton from Nami, and talk about some of the stories that I worked on. So somebody mentioned Dublin in the comments, and I was actually very excited to see that because one of the stories that I wrote immediately after the release was the fact that Dublin was the fastest growing, or the city in the Bay Area with the most growth since the 2010 decennial census. So you can see over here that it had a 58% growth since 2010. So that was actually really surprising. And Dan, you were saying yesterday it was actually one of the cities with the most growth, like in the United States, right?
I think it was number 16. I know it's in the top 20. And I think a lot of the other ones in the top 20 were like new army bases or places like that. So it's really, really unusual for like a city to explode like this. It's incredible.
Right. So something else I noticed doing this analysis was that the higher growth generally tended to be in suburbs rather than big cities. So you can see in this chart that Oakland was the only like big city to have landed in the top 10 in the Bay Area. So that was something that was interesting. So I'm seeing more comments asking for bigger charts. Sorry, we can't make them bigger in the slideshow, but if you do navigate to sfchronicle.com/data, you can go to these different stories and then check out the charts in full size on a browser. And so Bay Area, so one thing that Nami was saying was that Bay Area's growth was surpassing that of California and also the US. And so another story we did on that note was kind of comparing to LA County as well. Even though that comparison may not sound super fair because LA County is one county, but if you actually look at the land mass, they're pretty comparable. So LA County actually plateaued while Bay Area continued to grow. So that was another interesting observation we had. The other story I worked on during the census release was about these two counties, Alameda and Santa Clara, achieving plurality Asian status. So these were, so plurality, we went over this terminology. So they're the biggest group out of all the groups present in those counties, but they're not the majority. They don't exceed 50%. So I know that these charts are, again, too small, but I'll read it out for you. So in 2020, in the 2020 decennial census, Alameda County had 33% Asian American and Pacific Islander population, and that was the largest group. And Santa Clara County actually had 39%. So usually we don't, it's not really a good practice to lump together Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, because just think about how big Asia is. So when I talk to experts about like the origin of this grouping, it used to make more sense back in the day when really, you know, Chinese and Japanese were the only Asian groups in America. But nowadays, that is no longer the case, right? And there are so many more diverse groups. And now this term AAPI represents too many groups and too many different types of issues for it to be representative. So we aggregated having full recognition of the issues, but we were comfortable doing so in this particular case because, for one thing, census does not break down Asian Americans further than that, and Pacific Islanders made up such a small population that we felt comfortable putting them together for the purpose of comparing to prior years when the data was not broken down. All right.
For those who are interested, I thought I'd mention that the 4 largest groups that would fall under Asian Americans are Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipino, and Indian. Those are what the peoples list as ancestry, and those make up the vast majority of the Asian Americans in the Bay Area.
Thanks for that context. All right, let's move on and pass the baton to Susie.
Great. So I think I saw a comment to this effect or a question in the chat about how census data can illuminate some of the most intractable problems that California and the Bay Area face, like an aging population, for example. So this isn't quite related to aging population per se, but it's related. So we did a story looking at the change in share of people under 18 in San Francisco. So several decades ago, I think around the 70s, San Francisco's population was about 25% under 18, and it was similar to other cities. And nowadays, as of the 2020 decennial census, its population is just 13% under 18, which is the lowest share of youths of any city in the entire country. So we looked at that and we wanted to figure out kind of why that is. And we got partway through to answering it, but definitely more follow-up reporting is needed. But one of the things we were looking at is just the cost of living in San Francisco. It is so expensive to live here, to live in San Francisco. And as many of you probably know, it's very difficult to raise a child in a very expensive city because the cost of raising a child is very high. So that's one thing we looked at. And just generally, I think the professional population is also very tech heavy, and tech tends to attract a lot of younger professionals, many of whom are doing a lot of family planning and waiting until a bit later to have kids. So yeah, that was one of the stories we did, looking a little bit deeper into these data. And then another story I did looked at another difficult issue that the Bay Area, San Francisco in particular, faces. So we were curious to look at how different neighborhoods had changed in population over the last 10 years. And as you saw earlier with Nami's story, San Francisco actually grew by a fair amount, more than the state of California and more than the US overall. But the several individual neighborhoods shrank or stayed the same. And so we chose to look at one of those neighborhoods, which was Bernal Heights. And I actually lived in Bernal Heights over the summer, and I can attest to the fact that it is a very lovely neighborhood. And I know a lot of people I know would love to live there. And I think the Chronicle has done some like best neighborhoods to, live in or whatever. And it's definitely usually consistently in those lists. So it's a very desirable neighborhood. So we wanted to know why it hadn't grown over the last 10 years. And we did a little bit of digging around. And the thing that kind of immediately stuck out to us was housing construction. So from 2011 to 2019, Bernal Heights did not construct a single housing unit with like 4 units or more. So it has not constructed any multifamily housing in the last 9-10 years, and it's constructed very few single family units as well. And that's partly because it has a very strict local housing code that prevents a lot of buildings being built. I think in most cases, you can't build residential buildings over 30 feet. And, the question is, I guess, there are a lot of people who live in Bernal Heights who say that it really preserves the neighborhood's character, and it means a lot to them that it stay that way. These single family homes create this kind of ambiance and atmosphere that brings a lot of people there. But then San Francisco is in this housing crisis. So it's kind of part of an ongoing debate, but we hope that this story can serve as a jumping off point, an informed jumping off point to that debate. Next slide. Yeah, so I cannot take credit for the awesome coding involved in this interactive, but I helped write and report this interactive. So we did a interactive story, we call it the Sumi, the Census Sumi. And it's an interactive story where you can basically input your own address. So let's put in the Chronicle's address, so 901 Mission Street. And there you go. There it is. So these charts are really small too. I'm like looking in there.
Hey, Susie, why don't you do an address? Why don't you put in my old address so we can see how it works? What about 1461 Alice? And there you go, in Oakland.
All right, there we go. Okay.
Oh, here we go. And now it's zoomed over, yeah.
So that's so interesting. So it looks like, unlike many other parts of Alameda County, Dan, your census tract lost Asian population as a share of the broader population in the last 10 years, right? Because it was 43% and now it's 38%.
That's right. Yeah.
And it looks like it got a lot more white and a lot less black. And the rest of stuff sort of stayed pretty similar. The percentage, as we were talking about earlier, more people are identifying as 2 or more races. So that share went up slightly. But this kind of mirrors, I think, what we have seen with the gentrification of Oakland and Alameda County in general. I actually typed in my own earlier address in Oakland and I saw something similar. Yeah, so you can then look at the entire city of Oakland, which has gotten a lot more Hispanic, it looks like, which is really interesting. Alameda County, and this is why it's called the Sumi, because it zooms out. And then you can look at the statewide changes as well. And then at the bottom, you can compare all the different geographies, which is kind of cool. Look at the difference in Hispanic population. That's remarkable. Yeah, wow. Yeah, so that's the Census Sumi. Definitely a fun thing to explore.
Yeah, and I know that we're going to be doing a bunch more work on the census, and obviously for years to come, we'll be using this to try to understand our community. I understand Yuhyan will be working on a piece about how the Black population is changing in the Bay Area. Obviously, San Francisco and Oakland have seen a really large drop over the last several decades of the share of the population that identifies as Black. Though some cities in further out in the East Bay and suburbs are increasing, like Fairfield and Vallejo and some other places in that area. So we're looking forward to sort of diving in to understand what the census can tell us about that. And really many other stories. I think Susie's going to be looking at vacancies. Actually, San Francisco has And most of the Bay Area has seen a real serious decline in the vacancy rate of housing units. That is, I think, largely just because as fewer and fewer houses are being built and so many more people wanting to live here, that whatever kind of housing there is, it just goes off the market like that. I'm not really sure about that though, because we haven't reported it out yet. So we'll find that out. Though at the same time, San Francisco's vacancy rate actually stayed about the same over the last decade, even went up slightly. So that's one of these mysteries that the data can show you, and then will lead us to do the kind of reporting that can really illuminate what's happening in our community. And we hope to find out interesting things to present to you.
Thanks, Dan. Also, I did want to ask, didn't somebody say earlier that Census released a public-facing tool that maybe these folks can go look at the data for themselves?
Yeah, so I just checked the Census site today, and they're coming out with it tomorrow. So the data that was released in August was in a format that's like a bit harder to work with. You need certain software or like R or Python coding to work with it. But Census is releasing a set of like data tools tomorrow, and they say that that'll make it easier for the public to browse the data, I think is how they phrased it.
All right, that sounds really cool. So be sure to go check that out, folks. And if one of us or all of us will end up posting that on our Twitter feeds, so you can follow along that way as well. At the end of our presentations, we'll be posting all of our contact info and Twitter feeds as well. So you will be able to access all of this information. And as for the charts, I believe that our Stream Master was able to put the link to our presentation into the comments. So if you can navigate to the presentation, you'll be able to browse all of the charts. All right. So now it's time for us to move into our Q&A session. We're going to start picking out some questions from the comments section. So please throw in all your questions. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. But I will let you know that we're going to try to stick to questions we can answer. So please, stick with us. And, if your question doesn't get asked on the stream, I really apologize. But we're going to try to get to as many as possible. So we have a question here from Jonathan, and any one of us can answer this. But Dan, maybe this is one for you. What's your process for determining the stories you cover?
Yeah, that is an amazing question. And honestly, the hardest part about our jobs and being a journalist in general, in my opinion, is deciding, what is worthy of covering. I think we have a few questions, really. I think we sort of ask ourselves every time we're going to write about something is, what purpose does this serve? Are we doing one of three things? Are we, as I said earlier, are we helping people learn something new? Is this something that other people don't already know? We don't want to do an analysis that just feeds into what people already believe. It's not that exciting. We want to present something new to you that the data can show you that you might not know. At the same time, if something's really important, like just the percentage of how many people live in San Francisco and the growth over time, we do want to just provide that because that's important context for our community. Another choice would be, we choose to cover, obviously we want people to read our work. I mean, we want to write things that are interesting to people, but we also want to do things that we think really, really matter. So we spend, Yuhyan does a lot of coverage of the fentanyl crisis, which is, it's a huge, huge issue in our community. Coronavirus and housing, fentanyl has killed or overdoses and over 700 some people in the last year and a half in this area. It's probably not exactly that number, but it's now killed more people than coronavirus in the county of San Francisco over the last year and a half. And we feel like we need to contribute in whatever way we can to helping deal with that issue. And that means covering it, putting a spotlight on it, trying to find interesting data that reflects on it. Same thing with fires. We're really looking for, okay, what are the problems in our community and how can we help educate people, inform people, call to account on those things? But we also want it to be fun. So we also trying to do stories that entertain sometimes too. So it's really a balance of all those things. And would you guys add anything else to that?
No, I think that was a good sum up. Yeah?
Great.
All right. Thanks, Dan. We have the next question is from Ryan. How does, I'm guessing, census data illuminate some of California's top challenges? For example, homelessness, housing overcrowding, the aging of the population. I believe we addressed some of this, but Susie, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have done a little bit of that, like this story that we did about Bernal Heights. I think I'm really looking forward to doing more stories on housing and how population data intersects with housing construction data. I think the thing that actually we were talking about the other day is many of our stories won't be like branded as census stories moving forward, but they will probably be using census data because population and some of these socio-demographic factors like race and ethnicity are some of the best predictors of people's quality of lives and things like that. And so we're probably going to be incorporating census data into many, if not most, of the stories that we do. Particularly a lot of the ones that I do about housing and crime and stuff like that. I'm just always looking at population data and ethnicity data.
Thanks, Susie. I'm looking at the next question and I'm thinking Nami is perfect for it. So here you go, Nami. This question is from Steven. What question would you most want added to the decennial census? What data point would be most interesting or helpful?
Oh God, I feel like that's a hard question.
Well, if you can't, if anybody else wants to take a stab at it, that's cool too.
Do other people have one that comes to mind?
I would love it if the census were able to do the things that they wanted to do. So, I mean, this isn't exactly adding a question, but they wanted to do this change where they made race ethnicity into one question and like gave people more like opportunities to identify in the way that they identify. And so that's like a change. The census puts a lot of effort into thinking about these things, but President Trump actually and the Department of Commerce like rejected like what they wanted to do. So it feels like a real shame that the census isn't. I think maybe if a different administration next time they'll get to do that. I mean, and I think we might talk about this, but I think the main group that this helps is there's an increasing number of people who identify as Hispanic who don't identify as any of the race options. So they don't think of themselves as white, Black, or Asian. And so it's just, it would be amazing if like the census could allow people to identify as the way that they identify rather than forcing them into a bucket.
I will add a little bit to that thought. I completely agree. And I would hope, not necessarily a whole new question, but I would hope for more disaggregation, breakdowns of different ethnicities. As I was talking about earlier with the Asian American group, or even like the Hispanic group, those are really broad categories. And, there are so many different ethnicities that face different types of challenges. And if we don't understand, and if we don't have great data on how different the challenges are, like we can't help each other. So I will add that thought there. And Nami, I'm so sorry.
No. As you guys were talking, I was thinking. I think one thing that I would say that I wish we could get is the census block data. And like we talked about how it is available in this data release, but because of certain privacy methodologies or techniques that the census used for this census, a lot small areas are going to be or potentially inaccurate. or the numbers have sort of changed in a way that could be misleading. And so we've sort of stuck to using census tracts. And yeah, but the census block data is there, it's available. But it's questionable. I think there are some studies happening that will look at how reliable that data is.
You know, I see Yuhyan's cat was excited about this
Oh,
discussion
yes.
of privacy.
Yes, this is Misha, everyone. Misha came to say hello. He's a data cat. Actually, even before my cat interrupted me, I had another question actually for the entire team, because I saw multiple questions along the same line. So there were folks who were asking about what tools we use for data analysis. So Nami, why don't you start us out, and then we'll just kind of go around the room and quickly talk about what our main tools of the trade are.
Yeah, for sure. So for analysis, I usually use R, but also like Excel and Google Sheets. They're very.
Wait, what is R, Nami?
Oh gosh, I have to explain what R is. R is a statistical programming language. Yeah, it's kind of like Python, if you know what that is. It's a similar programming language. Yeah, it helps us like restructure data and do certain statistical analyses. So that's mainly what I use for analysis. When it comes to visualization, D3 is really my go-to, but we also I'll also use Data Wrapper, which is more like point and click, and it lets us make charts much faster. I'm going to call on Susie next.
Great. So yeah, I primarily also use R for statistical analysis and restructuring data and things like that. But I actually, it's so funny. I had a troll on Twitter say that like my analysis was done using Excel, as if that was like an insult. But Excel is awesome and really useful. And I just want to tell everybody that if you're doing like good, solid data analysis in Excel, that's like half the battle in being a data reporter. So just wanted to shout out Excel. And then I also use Data Wrapper primarily for visualizations. I did not come to this job with like a developer background or anything like that. So yeah, and then like open source tools like OpenRefine are also really awesome. And I just wanted to also say that if you're a student on this call, on this video, please reach out to us, because we are like always trying to get new people into data journalism, and it's such a fun field, and you should definitely reach out to us, and we'd be happy to like chat with you about our different journeys and what you might be interested in going forward with your career. So, all right, Yuhyan, what tools do you use?
So I just want to say that this is how we usually do our morning meetings. We call on each other, and Dan always gets called last. So I'm sorry you're getting called last again. But anyway, I actually am the only person who speaks a different language on this team. I'm a Python user, which is another programming language. I would say more versatile, but but maybe y'all disagree, but I think that can do all of the same things and more. So I use Python mostly for analysis, but just like everybody else, also Excel, Google Sheets, and all of these other tools. And for visualizations, also Data Wrapper. I think that one of my special tools is using geographic information systems, which is called GIS for short. So if you see like maps and like complicated spatial analyses, sometimes, you know, that's like GIS. And that comes particularly handy for like fire coverage. So I actually have a pretty cool fire spatial analysis coming out on Friday, hopefully. So please keep an eye out for that. And now, Dan.
Yeah, I'm an R user. I think they covered a lot of the things that I use. One thing I will mention is that what we use from a data perspective, one of the really cool things about doing local data journalism is a lot of the counties in the region have open data portals. So if you wanted to do your own work and learn something about Alameda County or Contra Costa County, et cetera, San Francisco, they all have websites you can go to that you just put in Contra Costa open data, and you'll find a site where there's a bunch of really cool data sets on coronavirus or 311 calls or which trees are on every block of every street. There's this incredible wealth of data, and we rely on that a lot, and it's a really, really cool source to use our tools on.
All right, are we ready for the next question? All right, here's one from Ian. Does the timing of the census capture work from home trends, driving Bay Area folks eastward for cheaper and bigger housing?
Yes, a little bit, like kind of. That's a great question, and it did affect things. You can see in the data that like Berkeley and SFUSD, like if you look at some of the charts that we've made, you'll see that they've gone down in population from the last decade, and most of that's probably because students actually weren't where they would normally be. That's the biggest, as far as I can tell, that's the biggest effect, is that students weren't, and that's a ton of people. It's a lot of people now in college between 18 and 21. As far as like more people in, say, Tahoe or something like that, moving from San Francisco, you really can't see it so much, as far as I can tell. Nami, I know, has done a lot of work with this. Do you think that that's there?
I don't think so. And I think it's a good reminder to everyone that like the census was collected like April. Was that right? March, April, around then?
It's supposed to be April 1st. Snapshot right. In time for April 1st, but they do it over a couple of months. Yeah. Right.
And so that's like around when the pandemic was sort of like, the pandemic hit and people were like starting to work from home. So I'm guessing that's sort of what Ian is referencing. So yeah, I think, Dan, I agree with everything that you said. The obvious ones, I think, are the universities.
Yeah, and I guess that'll be really interesting from the perspective of those places going to get less funding because they had less people at the moment. I wonder if the government will try to do anything. It's something that maybe we
I actually remember seeing a whole paper about this because there are so many cities across the U.S. that are so university population dependent. So this is definitely a very, very interesting issue.
Yeah.
Next question, and this I will say, sad to say this might be our last question, and it's from Matt. Does your team help all SF Chronicle journalists weave data into their stories, or do you analyze and write all the stories end to end?
Susie, why don't you take that? You've been around the longest of us.
Sure. I would say both. So I think our team has done different things over the last 6 months. We've been experimenting with how we can best serve the newsroom. And at various times, we've taken a different approach to this, basically. I know all three of us work with different journalists in different capacities. So I work a lot with the engagement team on making charts for coronavirus case rates and things like that. Nami pairs a lot with the politics reporters to do quick turn political data stories. And Yuhyan works a lot with the environmental reporters, doing fire coverage and things like that. But I think our bread and butter for all of us is our own stories, which is pretty cool. And I think that at a lot of other data teams, that might not necessarily be the case. So it's been a really cool opportunity to be able to do a lot of the writing and reporting ourselves, as well as the analysis.
Thank you, Susie. And here we're going to wrap up. We are so sorry that we did not get to all of the questions, but we are hoping to do more of these events. So we hope that you'll return and come to our events again and ask us more questions. We also have this tool, Ask Us Anything tool, that you can come to and here it is, the link. You can come over here and send us the questions, and we will try our best to get to them. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and thank you to all of our Chronicle subscribers. The work done across our newsroom wouldn't be possible without your continued support. If you're not already a subscriber, there are promotions going on, so we would hope that you would check it out. And if you're a student and struggling to pay for a subscription, send us an email. And, I'll see what I can do to help out. All right. Anybody else got anything else to say?
No, thank you so much for coming. We enjoyed having
you.
you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Such a pleasure.
Uh,
Bye.